Good news, folks. We're almost done with the Apocrypha.
And in my mother's womb was fashioned to be flesh in the time of 10 months, being compacted in blood of the seed of man.
That's right.
Of the seed of man.
The word seed is sperm, and sperm comes through having sex.
It's shut out of your father's rod,
Right.
to put it in layman terms, in his penis.
That's right.
That means a man put his penis in a woman and bust off in it.
Then the angel said to him, "Take out the entrails of this fish, and lay up his heart and his gall and his liver for thee. For these are necessary for useful medicines."
The rest of the chapters of the book of Esther,
Go ahead.
which are found neither in the Hebrew nor in the Chaldee.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts and Buttons are busy wrestling on the floor. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. And this is an Apocrypha episode, and it is the last of 2nd Maccabees. This one actually has a lot of stuff going on. I mean, it's not, really well described or anything like that, but there's, it's mostly discussing battles and fighting, so it's not genealogies or other bullshit crap. Not really a lot of talk about since the last episode. I will say I have heard from a couple of you who have all said, yeah, the new mic sounds fine, so I'm keeping it. If you don't like it, you should have said something. One other brief announcement that I want to make. If you want to support the podcast, don't have money, and don't mind listening to ads, then there is an app called Radio Public, which you can use to listen to the podcast. You download the app on your Android or iOS device and do a search for the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. There's only one other atheist podcast on there, and that's Atheist Nomads, at least when I checked. Anyways, it'll insert some ads. I don't know. I think it's just at the beginning and at the end of the podcast. But for every listener, I will get some money, provided you actually listen to the entire podcast. In theory. I don't know how well it works. I just got everything set up this weekend, so we will have to see how it goes. But hey, every little bit helps. So, and I don't, it's their app, so technically they can tell if you've skipped the ads, but I don't know if they do that or not. But, it is a way for me to get some money and for you to support the show if you can't afford to pay via Patreon or PayPal. All right. That's about it. So, one other thing. I will be speaking on the podcaster panel at this year's NanoCon, assuming I can get a ride to the convention. I love how they just sprung that on me. That, oh yes, you're on the podcast panel, so we need your biographical information. Thanks, guys. You didn't ask. You didn't, But anyways, let's get to the last of 2nd Maccabees and all the gore and violence it offers.
2 Mac 12. When these covenants were made, Lysias went unto the king, and the Jews were about their husbandry. But the governors of several places, Timotheus and Apollonius, the sons of Genneus, also Hieronymus and Demophon, and beside them Nicanor, the governor of Cyprus, would not suffer them to be quiet and live in peace. The men of Joppa also did such an ungodly deed. They prayed the Jews that dwelt among them to go with their wives and children into the boats which they had prepared, as though they meant them no harm.
Sounds like the beginning of the Book of Mormon almost.
Yeah?
who accepted of it according to the common decree of the city as being desirous to live in peace, and suspecting nothing. But when they were gone forth into the deep, they drowned no less than 200 of them. Well, how many did they load?
I don't know. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. When Judas heard of this cruelty done unto his countrymen, he commanded those that were with him to make them ready. And calling upon God the righteous judge, he came against those murderers of his brethren, and burnt the haven by night, and set the boats on fire, and those that fled thither he slew.
And when the town was shut up, he went backward, as if he would return to root out all of them of the city of Joppa. But when he heard that the Jamnites were minded to do in like manner unto the Jews that dwelt among them, he came upon the Jamnites also by night, and set fire to the haven and the navy, so that the light of the fire was seen at Jerusalem 240 furlongs off.
Now when they were gone from thence 9 furlongs in their journey toward Timotheus, no fewer than 5,000 men on foot, and 500 horsemen of the Arabians set upon them. Whereupon there was a very sore battle, but Judas's side, by the help of God, got the victory. So I guess they weren't using iron chariots. So that the Nomades, that's how it's spelled, of Arabia, being overcome, besought Judas for peace, promising both to give him cattle and to pleasure him otherwise. Ooh. Then Judas... What?
Lucky bastard.
Mm-hmm. Then Judas, thinking indeed that they would be profitable in many things, granted them peace, whereupon they shook hands, and so they departed to their tents. I bet there's a betrayal coming.
I'm guessing there's something. He went also about to make a bridge to a certain strong city, which was fenced about with walls and inhabited by people of diverse countries, and the name of it was Caspis. But they that were within it put such trust in the strength of the walls and provisions of victuals, that they behaved themselves rudely toward them that were in with Judas, railing and blaspheming and uttering such words as were not to be spoken. Wherefore Judas, with his company, calling upon the great Lord of the world, who, without rams or engines of war, did cast down Jericho in the time of Joshua, gave a fierce assault against the walls.
And took the city by the will of God, and made unspeakable slaughters. That's a nice God. Insomuch that a lake 2 furlongs broad near adjoining thereunto, being filled full, was seen running with blood. Then departed they from thence 750 furlongs, and came to Charaka unto the Jews that are called Tubuini. But as for Timotheus, they found him not in the places, for before he had dispatched anything, he departed from thence, having left a very strong garrison in a certain hold.
So what, like a full Nelson or something?
I'm guessing.
Howbeit, Dositheus and Sosipater, who were of Maccabees' captains, went forth and slew those that Timotheus had left in the fortress, above 10,000 men. And Maccabees ranged his army by bands, and set them over the bands, and went against Timotheus, who had about him 120,000 men on foot, and 2,500 horsemen. Now, when Timotheus had knowledge of Judas's coming, he sent the women and children and the other baggage unto a fortress called Carnion, for the town was hard to besiege and uneasy to come unto, by reason of the straitness of all the places. Yeah, okay, sure, whatever.
Honestly, if it's a straight shot, I think that'd be pretty easy to attack. Although, if it's straight and flat, then you've got a problem because you can be seen well off.
Yeah, exactly.
But when Judas, his first band, came into sight, the enemies, being smitten with fear and terror through the appearing of him who seeth all things, fled amain, one running into this way, another that way, so as that they were often hurt of their own men and wounded with the points of their own swords. Cue the Benny Hill music. Judas was also very earnest in pursuing them, killing those wicked wretches, of whom he slew about 30,000 men. Moreover, Timotheus himself fell into the hands of Dositheus and Sosipater, whom he besought with much craft to let him go with his life, because he had many of the Jews' parents and the brethren of some of them, who, if they put him to death, should not be regarded.
So when he had assured them with many words that he would restore them without hurt according to the agreement, they let him go for the saving of their brethren. Then Maccabees marched forth to Carnion and to the temple of Atargatis, and there he slew 25,000 persons. So he's some kind of tough guy. And after he had put to flight and destroyed them, Judas removed the host towards Ephron, a strong city wherein Lysias abode, and a great multitude of diverse nations, and the strong young men kept the walls and defended them mightily, wherein also was great provisions of engines and darts.
But when Judas and his company had called upon Almighty God, who with his power breaketh the strength of his enemies, they won the city and slew 25,000 of them that were within. From thence they departed to Scythopolis, which lieth 600 furlongs from Jerusalem. But when the Jews that dwelt there had testified that the Scythopolitans dealt lovingly with them and entreated them kindly in the time of their adversity,
they gave them thanks, desiring them to be friendly still unto them, and so they came to Jerusalem, the feast of the weeks approaching. And after the feast, called Pentecost, they went forth against Gorgias, the governor of Idumea, who came out with 3,000 men on foot and 400 horsemen.
And it happened that in their fighting together a few of the Jews were slain, only just a couple. At which time Dositheus, one of Beckenor's company, who the fuck is Beckenor, who was on horseback and a strong man, was still upon Gorgias, and taking hold of his coat, drew him by force. And when he would have taken that cursed man alive, a horseman of Thracia, coming upon him, smote off his shoulder, so that Gorgias fled unto Marissa. I'm thinking of Gorgeous George, the wrestler, reading that for some reason. Now, when they that were with Gorgias had fought long and were weary, Judas called upon the Lord that he would shew himself to be their helper and leader of the battle.
And with that he began in his own language, and sung psalms with a loud voice, and rushing unawares upon Gorgias's men, he put them to flight. So Judas gathered his host, and came into the city of Odolam, and when the 7th day came, they purified themselves, as the custom was, and kept the Sabbath in the same place. And upon the day following, as the use had been, Judas and his company came to take up the bodies of them that were slain, and to bury them with their kinsmen in their fathers' graves. That's kind of dark.
Yeah. Now, under the coats of every one that was slain, they found things consecrated to the idols of the Jamanites, which is forbidden the Jews by the law. Then every man saw that this was the cause wherefore they were slain. All men, therefore praising the Lord, the righteous judge, who had opened the things that were hid, betook themselves unto prayer, and besought him that the sin committed might wholly be put out of remembrance. Besides, that noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves from sin, for so much as they saw before their eyes the things that came to pass for the sins of those that were slain.
And when he had made a gathering throughout the company to the sum of 2,000 drachms of silver, he sent it to Jerusalem to offer a sin offering, therefore doing therein very well and honestly, in that he was mindful of the resurrection. Foreshadowing? For if he had not hoped that they that were slain would have risen again, it had been superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. And also, in that he perceived that there was great favor laid up for those that died godly, it was an holy and good thought, whereupon he made a reconciliation for the dead, that they might be delivered from sin.
Boy.
I wonder if this is an interpolation. No, not an interpolation, an insertion, a deliberate attempt to, I don't know, whitewash what's coming next.
Well, remember, I mean, this seems like it was written far past when it was supposed to have been written.
Yeah.
So, I have a feeling this was written in the CE and made to look like it was written in BCE, and they are adding stuff to, feed into the whole God business, Jeebus business.
It definitely has that flavor.
Yeah. All right, now to Mac 13. In the 149th year, it was told Judas that Antiochus Eupator was coming with a great power into Judea, and with him Lysias, his protector and ruler of his fairs, having either of them a Grecian power of footmen and 110,000, and horsemen 5,300, and elephants 220, so only 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with hooks. Boy. Menelaus also joined himself with them, and with great dissimulation encouraged Antiochus of the Holy Hand Grenade, not for the safeguard of the country, but because he thought to have been made governor.
But the King of Kings moved Antiochus's mind against this wicked wretch, and Lysias informed the king that this man was the cause of all mischief, so that the king commanded to bring him unto Berea, and to put him to death, as the manner is in that place. Now there was in that place a tower of 50 cubits high, full of ashes, and it had a round instrument which on every side hanged down into the ashes. And whosoever was condemned of sacrilege, or had committed any other grievous crime, there did all men thrust him unto death. Sounds kinky.
Yeah. 50 that's roughly 50 yards high, which is...
I thought a cubit was from your elbow to your fingertip.
It could be. Well, that's 50 feet high, so that's 5 stories. It's about the limit of what they could build back then.
Yeah.
But I'm calling bullshit on that one.
Yep.
Such a death it happened that wicked men to die, not having so much as burial in the earth, and that most justly. For inasmuch as he had committed many sins about the altar, whose fire and ashes were holy, he received his death in ashes. Now the king came with a barbarous and haughty mind to do far worse to the Jews than had been done in his father's time.
Sounds like a game of one downsmanship.
Yeah.
Which things, when Judas perceived, he commanded the multitude to call upon the Lord night and day, that if ever at any other time he would now also help them, being at the point to be put from their law, from their country, and from the holy temple, and that he would not suffer the people that had even now been but a little refreshed, but to be in subjection to the blasphemous nations. So when they had all done this together, and besought the merciful Lord with weeping and fasting, and laying flat upon the ground 3 days long, Judas, having exhorted them, commanded that they should be in a readiness.
Yeah, I can't think of a better tactical maneuver than starving your own troops.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And Judas, being apart with the elders, determined before the king's host should enter into Judea and get the city to go forth and try the matter in fight by the help of the Lord. So when he had committed all to the Creator of the world and exhorted his soldiers to fight manfully, even unto death for the laws, the temple, the city, the country, and the commonwealth, he camped by motive. And having given the watchword to them that were about him, victory is of God, with the most valiant and choice young men. Yeah. There's a whole other interpretation of that line.
Phrasing.
He went into the king's tent by night, phrasing, and slew in the camp about 4,000 men and the chiefest of the elephants and all that were upon him. But apparently didn't kill the king?
I'm not sure. And at last they filled the camp with fear and tumult, and departed with good success. This was done in the break of the day, because the protection of the Lord did help him. Now, when the king had taken a taste of the manliness of the Jews, he went about to put the holds up by policy. No, to take the holds by policy. Oh, they really should have proofread this shit.
Yeah. And marched toward Bethurza, which was a stronghold of the Jews, but he was put to flight, failed, and lost of his men. For Judas had conveyed unto them that were in it such things as were necessary. But Rhodicus, who was in the Jews' host, disclosed the secrets to the enemies. Therefore he was sought out, and when they had gotten him, they put him in prison.
The king treated with them in Bethsum the second time, gave his hand, took theirs, departed, fought with Judas, was overcome. Heard that Philip, who was left over the affairs in Antioch, was desperately bent, confounded, entreated the Jews, submitted himself, and sware to all equal conditions, agreed with them, and offered sacrifice, honored the temple, and dealt quietly with the place, and accepted well of Maccabees, made him principal governor from Ptolemais unto the Gerenians.
Sounds good to me.
Came to Ptolemais. The people there were grieved for the covenants, for they stormed because they would make their covenants void. Lysias went up to the judgment seat, said as much as could be in defense of the cause, persuaded, pacified, made them well affected, returned to Antioch. Thus it went touching the king's coming and departing.
Crazy.
Jesus. Oh, they.
Yeah.
Got her mind.
Mac 14. After 3 years was Judas informed that Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, having entered by the haven of Tripolis, which would be Tripoli, with a great power and navy, had taken the country and killed Antiochus, guess that hand grenade didn't help him, and Lysias, his protector. Now one Alcimius, who had been high priest, and had defiled himself willfully in the times of their mingling with the Gentiles, seeing that by no means he could save himself, nor have any more access to the holy altar,
came to King Demetrius in the 151st year, presenting unto him a crown of gold and a palm, and also of the boughs which were used solemnly in the temple. And so that day he held his peace. Peace, not CE. Howbeit, having gotten opportunity to further his foolish enterprise, and being called into council by Demetrius, and asked how the Jews stood affected, and what they intended, he answered thereunto. Those of the Jews that he called Ascidians, whose captain is Judas Maccabeus, nourish war, and are seditious, and will not let the rest be in peace.
Therefore I, being deprived of mine ancestors' honor, I mean the high priesthood, am now come hither. First, verily, for the unfeigned care I have of things pertaining to the king, and secondly, even for that I intend the good of mine own countrymen, for all our nation is in no small misery through the unadvised dealing of them aforesaid. Wherefore, O king, seeing thou knowest all these things, be careful for the country and our nation, which is pressed on every side, according to the clemency that thou readily shewest unto all.
For as long as Judas liveth, it is not possible that the state should be quiet. This was no sooner spoken of him, but others of the king's friends, being maliciously set against Judas, did more incense Demetrius, and forthwith calling Nicanor, who had been master of the elephants, and making him governor over Judea, he sent them forth,
commanding him to slay Judas and to scatter them that were with him, and to make Alcimius high priest of the great temple. Then the heathen that had fled out of Judea from Judas came to Nicanor by flocks, thinking the harm and calamities of the Jews to be their welfare. Now when the Jews heard of Nicanor's coming, and that the heathen were up against them, they cast earth upon their heads, and made supplication to him that had established his people forever, and who always helpeth his portion with manifestation of his presence. So I guess we're pretty ungodly since we've never seen him.
Yep. So at the commandment of the captain, they removed straightways from thence, and came near unto them at the count of Dessau. Now Simon, Judas's brother, had joined battle with Nicanor, but was somewhat discomfited through the sudden silence of his enemies. Nevertheless, Nicanor, hearing of the manliness of them that were with Judas, and the courageousness that they had to fight for their country, durst not try the matter by the sword. Okay.
So when they had taken long advisement thereupon, and the captain had made the multitude acquainted therewith, and it appeared that they were all of one mind, they consented to the covenants, and appointed a day to meet in together by themselves. And when the day came, and stools were set for either of them, Ludus placed armed men ready in convenient places, lest some treachery should be suddenly practiced by the enemies, so they made a peaceable conference.
Now Nicanor abode in Jerusalem, and did no hurt, but sent away the people that came flocking unto him. And he would not willingly have Judas out of his sight, for he loved the man from his heart. He prayed them also to take a wife, and to beget children, so he married, was quiet, and took part of this life.
But Alcimus, perceiving the love that was betwixt them, and considering the covenants that were made, came to Demetrius, and told him that Nicanor was not well affected toward the state, for that he had ordained Judas, a traitor to his realm, to be the king's successor. Then the king, being in a rage, and provoked with the accusations of the most wicked men, wrote to Nicanor, signifying that he was much displeased with the covenants, and commanding him that he should send Maccabees prisoner in all haste unto Antioch.
When this came to Nicanor's hearing, he was much confounded in himself, and took it grievously that he should make void the articles which were agreed upon, the man being in no fault. But because there was no dealing against the king, he watched his time to accomplish this thing by policy. Notwithstanding, when Maccabees saw that Nicanor began to be churlish unto him, and that he entreated him more roughly than he was wont, perceiving that such sour behavior came not of good, he gathered together not a few of his men, and withdrew himself from Nicanor.
But the other, knowing that he was notably prevented by Judas's policy, came into the great and holy temple, and commanded the priests that were offering their usual sacrifices to deliver him the man. And when they sware they could not tell where the man was whom he sought, he stretched out his right hand toward the temple and made an oath in this manner. If ye will not deliver me, Judas, as a prisoner, I will lay this temple of God even with the ground, and I will break down the altar and erect a noble temple unto Bacchus. Woohoo!
Nice. I like Bacchus.
Yeah.
That's the wine guy, right?
Yep.
All right. After these words he departed. Then the priests lifted up their hands toward heaven and besought him that was ever a defender of their nation, saying in this manner, Thou, O Lord of all things, who hast need of nothing, wast pleased that the temple of thine habitation should be among us. Therefore, now, O holy Lord of all holiness, keep this house ever undefiled, which lately was cleansed, and stop every unrighteous mouth.
Now was there accused unto Nicanor one Razis, one of the elders of Jerusalem, a lover of his countrymen, I bet he was, and a man of very good report, who for his kindness was called a father of the Jews. For in the former times, when they mingled not themselves with the Gentiles, he had been accused of Judaism, and did boldly jeopard his body and life with all vehemency for the religion of the Jews. So Nicanor, willing to declare the hate that he bare unto the Jews, sent above 500 men of war to take him.
For he thought by taking him to do the Jews much hurt. Now, when the multitude would have taken the tower and violently broken into the outer door and bade that fire should be brought to burn it, he, being ready to be taken on every side, fell upon his sword, choosing rather to die manfully than to come into the hands of the wicked, to be abused otherwise than beseemed his noble birth.
But missing his stroke through haste, the multitude also rushing within the doors, he ran boldly up to the wall and cast himself down manfully among the thickest of them, when danger reared its ugly head. But they, quickly giving back, and a space being made, he fell down into the midst of the void place. Oh, man. Stage dive and the mosh pit opens up and you hit the ground hard. Nevertheless, while there was yet breath within him, being inflamed with anger, he rose up, and though his blood gushed out like spouts of water, and his wounds were grievous, yet he ran through the midst of the throng, and standing upon a steep rock. When as his blood was now quite gone, so he's dead, he plucked out his bowels, hairy-carry, and taking them in both his hands, he cast them upon the throng, and calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to restore him those again, he thus died.
Yep, that worked out really well.
Yeah.
All right. And it looks like 2 Mac 15 is the end of this.
Yeah.
And it's only 39 lines, so... But Nicanor, hearing that Judas and his company were in the strong places about Samaria, resolved without any danger to set upon them on the Sabbath day. Nevertheless, the Jews that were compelled to go with him said, O destroy not so cruelly and barbarously, but give honor to that day, which he that seeth all things hath honored with holiness above all other days. Then the most ungracious wretch demanded, if there were a mighty one in heaven that had commanded the Sabbath day to be kept. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. And when they said, there is in heaven a living God and mighty who commanded the seventh day to be kept, then said the other, and I also am mighty upon earth, and I command to take arms and to do the king's business, yet he obtained not to have his wicked will done. So Nicanor, in exceeding pride and haughtiness, determined to set up a public monument of his victory over Judas and them that were with him.
But Maccabees had ever sure confidence that the Lord would help him. Wherefore he exhorted his people not to fear the coming of the heathen against them, but to remember the help which in former times they had received from heaven, and now to expect the victory and aid which would come unto them from the Almighty. And so comforting them out of the law and the prophets, and withal putting them in mind of the battles they had won afore, he made them more cheerful. Oh.
And when he had stirred up their minds, he gave them their charge, shewing them therewithal the falsehood of the heathen and the breach of oaths. Thus he armed every one of them, not so much with defensive shields and spears, as with comfortable and good words. Yeah. So he blew smoke up their ass instead of giving them weapons. And beside that, he told them a dream worthy to be believed, as if it had been so indeed, which did not a little rejoice them. And this was his vision, that Onias, who had been a high priest, a virtuous and good man, reverend in conversation, gentle in condition, well spoken also, and exercised from a child in all points of virtue, holding up his hands, prayed for the whole body of the Jews.
So is this a win one for the Gipper moment?
Yeah.
Sounds like. This done, in like manner there appeared a man with grey hairs and exceeding glorious, who was of a wonderful and excellent majesty. Then Onias answered, saying, This is a lover of the brethren, who prayed much for the people and for the holy city, to wit, Jeremias, the prophet of God. Whereupon Jeremias, holding forth his right hand, gave to Judas a sword of gold, and in giving it spake thus.
Yeah, it'll fracture as soon as you strike somebody with it, but it looks real cool.
I don't know if it would fracture. I thought it would bend.
Either or. Depends on exactly how it was made. But yeah, it'd be pretty much worthless in battle. Weigh it shitload and make you a good target.
Oh yeah.
Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with the which thou shalt wound the adversary. Thus being comforted by the words of Judas, but that's not Judas saying that, it's Jeremiah, which were very good, and able to stir them up to valor and to encourage the hearts of the young men, they determined not to pitch camp, but courageously to set upon them, and manfully to try the matter by conflict, because the city and the sanctuary and the temple were in danger. So this is Sparta moment.
Yep, looks like. For the care that they took for their wives and their children, their brethren, and folks was in least account with them, but the greatest and principal fear was for the holy temple. Also, they that were in the city took not the least care, being troubled for the conflict abroad. And now, when as all looked what should be the trial, and the enemies were already come near, and the army was set in array, and the beasts conveniently placed, and the horsemen set in wings. So, off in the vomitoria or something? I don't know.
Maccabees, seeing the coming of the multitude, and the diverse preparations of armor, and the fierceness of the beasts, stretched out his hands toward heaven, and called upon the Lord that worketh wonders, as opposed to the Lord that worketh Sudoku, knowing that victory cometh not by arms, but even as it seemeth good to him, he giveth it to such as are worthy. Therefore, in his prayer, he said after this manner, O Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Thou did send thine angel in the time of Ezekias, king of Judea, and did slay in the host of Sennacherib 185,000.
That's a shit ton.
Yeah. Wherefore now also, O Lord of heaven, send a good angel before us for a fear and dread upon them.
And through the might of thine arm let those be stricken with terror that come against the holy people to blaspheme. And he ended thus. Then Nicanor and they that were with him came forward with trumpets and songs. But Judas and his company encountered the enemies with invocation and prayer, so that fighting with their hands and praying unto God with their hearts, they slew no less than 30 and 5,000 men, for through the appearance of God they were greatly cheered. Oh, so he did show up. Nice.
Now when the battle was done, returning again with joy, they knew that Nicanor lay dead in his harness. Then they made a great shout and a noise, praising the Almighty in their own language. And Judas, who was ever the chief defender of the citizens both in body and mind, and who continued his love toward his countrymen all his life, commanded to strike off Nicanor's head and his hand with his shoulder, and bring them to Jerusalem. So that would be his arm.
Well, yeah. But, you know, they're padding this for length, I think.
Yeah.
Where are we?
31.
31. So when he was there and called them of his nation together and set the priests before the altar, he sent for them that were of the tower, and shewed them vile Nicanor's head in the hand of that blasphemer, which with proud brags he had stretched out over the holy temple of the Almighty. And when he had cut out the tongue of that ungodly Nicanor, he commanded that they should give it by pieces unto the fowls, and hang up the reward of his madness before the temple.
So every man praised toward heaven the glorious God, saying, Blessed be he that hath kept his own place undefiled. Like that would be a hard task for an omniscient God. He hanged also Nicanor's head upon the tower, an evident and manifest sign unto all of the help of the Lord. And they ordained all with a common decree in no case to let that day pass without solemnity. Yeah, it sounds like they're being really solemn when they're waving the head around and celebrating. But to celebrate the 30th day of the 12th month, which in the Syrian tongue is called Adar, the day before Mardochius' day. The fuck is Mardochius?
Never heard of him. Thus went it with Nicanor, and from that time forth the Hebrews had the city in their power, and here will I make an end. Yay! And if I have done well, and as is fitting the story, it is that which I desired, but if slenderly and meanly, it is that which I could attain unto. For as it is hurtful to drink wine or water alone, and as wine mingled with water is pleasant, and delighteth the taste, even so speech finely framed delighteth the ears of them that read the story, and here shall be an end. Okay, I'm calling bullshit on this guy with the even so finely framed delighteth the ears.
Yeah.
That,
and it's certainly not the end of the story, because there's 2 more books.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.